Kids these days may think they have it bad when their parents take away their phones or teachers call home to tattle on them, but if you were born back in the days of the Aztec, you might be dangled over burning chilies for your disobedience. Still think you got it tough? Why not try some of the historically worst punishments children ever suffered? When it comes to horrible punishments for children, Victorian England might just have that market cornered. The 19th century was a tough time to be a kid, especially in a society that didn't distinguish between adults and children when it came to punishment, even criminal punishment. Children found guilty of crimes like theft could face the same harsh punishments that would be levied against an adult thief. Children could find themselves sentenced to hard time in an adult prison, forced to do months of hard labor, or even be sent to the penal colonies. In extreme cases, children as young as 12 years old could be hanged and executed for their crimes. As the Industrial Revolution kicked off and more people flooded into Victorian cities from the rural countryside, cities became crowded and crime rates skyrocketed. This frightened the wealthy upper and middle-class citizens, and their fear shaped the laws that would dictate how criminals, including children, were treated in Victorian England. Sending criminals and other undesirables to the new frontier of Australia became the common method of dealing with crime, out of sight, out of mind. Between 1788 and 1850, 162,000 convicts were sent to serve their sentences in Australia on 806 ships. Since child criminals were not treated any differently than adults in Victorian England, countless children found themselves among the shiploads of convicts sent to the New World. An 1873 passenger list from a ship bound for an Australian penal colony listed among its human cargo a number of underage criminals. Kids as young as 13 were regularly sentenced to spending 7 years or more working in the penal colony halfway across the world for crimes like stealing from their master or even just for stealing a coat and boots. Eventually, people in Victorian England started to become a bit uncomfortable with the extremely harsh ways that they were punishing children. In response to public outcry, the government created reformatory schools as a more humane way to rehabilitate criminal children. The idea behind these schools was that they could provide a place where bad children could spend several years separated from the so-called bad influences at home and in their daily environment. Reformatory schools were renowned for their strict discipline. Beatings were frequent, the children were exploited for free labor, and runaways were often locked up in isolation. Some court documents from 1873 provide some startling examples of how exactly harsh these punishments were. 11-year-old Joseph Lewis was sentenced to 1 month of hard labor for stealing 28 pounds of iron. John Greening, also 11 years old, was given a stiff sentence of 1 month of hard labor followed by 5 years at a reform school for his crime of stealing gooseberries off a bush. This harsh sentence for a seemingly minor infraction was likely because of his prior record of criminal behavior. He had already been sentenced to 2 months of hard labor and had received a public whipping for stealing coal. These are just two of the many examples of similarly harsh punishments given to Victorian children, many of whom were simply trying to keep themselves alive. Going back even further in history, child punishment becomes even more bizarre. The ancient Aztecs had some unique and especially harsh methods when it came to child rearing. Aztec children who were disobeying their parents could find themselves under fire, or rather over it. Naughty Aztec children who displeased their parents could be dangled over the chilies, which is exactly what it sounds like. They would be forcibly held over a small fire full of smoking habanero peppers. This bizarre punishment would usually only last for a few seconds at a time, but it was enough to burn the child's eyes and skin and cause extreme distress. Long-term exposure could cause intense weeping, painful skin irritations and burning sensations, coughing and difficulty breathing. A more intense form of the same punishment was used to execute criminals, so Aztec parents were not fooling around. As if this wasn't enough, Aztec parents were also known to leave misbehaving children outside and exposed to the elements overnight, or they would even scar them with cactus needles as a permanent reminder of their misdeeds. There's no doubt that kids throughout history were subjected to some pretty horrific punishments at home, but it wasn't just their parents they had to worry about. School today might be a respite from the rigidness of home for kids with overly strict parents, but in the past, school could be just as brutal as life at home. Teachers had ultimate authority over their pupils, and they were allowed and often encouraged to use corporal punishment to teach children how to behave properly and to prepare them for the harsh realities of the real world. Children who misbehaved at school around the turn of the 20th century could expect the same harsh treatment from their teachers as they would receive at home. Misbehavior, such as talking out of turn, disrupting class, or even daydreaming, could warrant a few lashes with the teacher's weapon of choice. A switch made with hickory branches, a leather strap, or a yardstick were common weapons of choice for teachers around the world. Corporal punishment is largely banned in schools around the world today, but shockingly, it's still legal in many states. Prior to COVID shutdowns, 600 students were hit at school every day. Unbelievably, students could also be punished for failing to learn properly. Rather than being given extra help and attention, children who struggled to keep up with their classmates could be sent to the corner of the room, where they would be forced to sit on a stool in full view of the rest of the class and made to wear a dunce cap, a large cone-shaped hat that was meant to humiliate them. The modern-day insulting taunts of conehead or blockhead have their roots in this shameful practice. Getting it at home and in the school is bad enough, but for some poor kids there was yet another place where they were subjected to horrific punishments: work. Child labor laws are a relatively new phenomenon. During the 17th and 18th centuries, as the Industrial Revolution kicked into high gear, there were no laws in place to protect workers at all, let alone child laborers. With no laws regulating the conduct of factory owners, child laborers became incredibly popular. For one thing, children could be paid significantly less for their work. In some cases, they made as little as 10% of what an adult would be paid to do the same work. Children were also preferred because they were seen as more obedient and were much easier to control, and let's face it, abuse, than adults were. Children were also smaller, which meant they could work in close quarters and fit into tight spaces. This allowed factories to keep their machines running while they sent children into dangerous areas to make repairs, saving them time and money compared to having to shut down production and have an adult complete the work. At the height of the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, many children, especially orphans, found themselves working hard for a living from a startlingly young age. Kids as young as 6 worked in Victorian factories, where conditions were abysmal and punishments were incredibly harsh. A typical workday could last upwards of 14 hours, and many child laborers lived on site at the factory, which meant that they never got a break from the hellish conditions. Factories and dormitories were overcrowded, filthy, and full of disease. And to make sure that the very thought of escape never even crossed the minds of these poor, overworked kids, their overseers devised brutally efficient ways of punishing runaways. Children who had run away and been caught, or even those who were just deemed a flight risk, were kept in irons. The factory blacksmith would fashion heavy iron chains, which would be riveted around the child's ankles and wound around their waist. The child would have to walk to work, do their job, and even sleep in the chains. If even that wasn't enough to stop them from running away, young children could face jail time for attempting to escape the hellish conditions of factory life. Even the most diligent child laborers were not immune from harsh punishments. The work was brutally hard. The expectations were nearly impossible to meet. Children who were deemed to be working too slowly were frequently beaten with straps, sticks, fists, and boots, often to the point of leaving permanent damage. But some overseers devised other, more creative forms of punishment to keep their young charges in line and working at a frantic pace. Shaving the head of rebellious child laborers was a favorite punishment, especially for girls. This embarrassing punishment marked the child out as a troublemaker, making them an easy target for further abuse. If the child appeared to be too tired to work at the impossible pace expected of them, their overseer would often hoist them into the air by their ankles and dunk them headfirst into the water cistern to shock them into wakefulness, before sending them back to work, where they were expected to make up for lost time. Then, of course, there was the innate danger of the work itself. Children were favored laborers in textile mills, where their small fingers and tiny frames could easily fit inside the complex machinery. These huge machines were full of dangerous spinning wheels and rotating belts, and too many children were gravely injured operating them. Children were often too small to operate the equipment properly, so they would stand on the frame of the machine to work, putting them at risk of falling into the spinning shafts and grinding gears just below them. Losing a finger, a limb, or even your life on one of these machines was sadly all too common in early 19th century factories. In fact, it was such a common occurrence that it usually didn't even warrant stopping production. Other child laborers were forced to continue working as their poor colleague or their body was removed from the factory floor. And if you thought this video was horrifying, you'll definitely want to check out our other videos, like this one, called Worst Punishments in the History of Mankind. Or maybe you'll like this other video instead.